The words echoed in the sudden silence of my kitchen, colder and sharper than the November wind rattling the window pane. Stop calling me. It wasn't a request. It was a command, laced with a fury that felt entirely alien. I was holding the phone so tightly my knuckles were white, staring at the cheerful floral wallpaper that my late husband Tom and I had put up together 3 decades ago. It felt like the flowers were wilting before my eyes. I had only called my son, David, to gently remind him about the car payment. It was the 3rd month in a row it was late, and the bank had sent me another notice, a polite but firm letter that felt like a slap in the face. I had co-signed the loan for his brand new SUV 2 years ago, a gleaming behemoth he and his wife, Emily, insisted they needed for safety. I had also put down a significant portion of the down payment, a gift of $10,000 from my savings, the money Tom had insisted I keep for rainy days. It seemed the rain was a constant storm in their lives, and I was the perpetual umbrella. David, it's just that the bank called again. I had started, my voice soft, careful not to sound accusatory. I had learned long ago that any conversation involving money with David had to be navigated like a minefield. I know, Mom. I know, he'd snapped, his voice tight with irritation. We have a lot going on right now. Emily's hours got cut. I understand, sweetheart, but my name is on the loan too. It affects my credit, I explained, the familiar churn of anxiety starting in my stomach. That's when he detonated. For God's sake, Mom, it's always about the money with you. Do you think I don't know my responsibilities? I'll handle it. Just stop calling me. Stop hovering over me like I'm still a child. The line went dead, but the explosion still rang in my ears. It's always about the money with you. The accusation was so profoundly unfair, it stole my breath. Since Tom had passed away 5 years ago, my life had been a quiet landscape of solitude, punctuated by the vibrant, chaotic, and unending needs of my only son and his wife. Money wasn't what I wanted to talk about. It was what they always needed to talk about. It was the language our relationship had been reduced to. I sank into a kitchen chair, the phone slipping from my grasp and clattering onto the linoleum floor. The sound was unnervingly loud in the stillness. Shock gave way to a cold, creeping numbness that started in my chest and spread through my limbs. I felt a wave of dizziness, the kind that comes with a sudden, deep emotional wound. For years, I had been the silent benefactor, the emergency contact, the 24/7 ATM. I had paid for their groceries when their cards were declined, covered their rent when they were in between jobs, and funded the down payment on their starter home, a sum so large, $80,000, that it had taken a huge bite out of the life insurance Tom had left for my security. Each time they had been so grateful, so full of promises. Emily would hug me, her voice sweet as honey, telling me I was a lifesaver and more of a mother to her than her own. David would look at me with those earnest eyes, the same eyes that had looked up at me from his crib, and swear it was the last time that we were on the cusp of a breakthrough. But the breakthroughs never came. The emergencies became routine. My role as a mother had morphed into that of a financier, and I had allowed it to happen, telling myself it was what a loving parent did. You support your child. You give them a safety net. But I was beginning to realize that my safety net had become their hammock, a comfortable place from which they had no intention of moving. The self-blame began to seep in, a bitter tide. I had been a fool, a lonely, foolish old woman so desperate for a place in my son's life that I had been willing to buy it. Tom had always been the practical one. "Sarah," he would say gently, "David needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. Don't make life too easy for him." I had ignored his wisdom, blinded by a maternal instinct that had become toxic. After Tom was gone, the silence in the house was deafening, and David's calls, even when they were requests for money, were a connection I craved. I had confused their dependency with affection. I thought back to their wedding 3 years ago. I had paid for the venue, a beautiful rustic barn they'd fallen in love with. I'd paid for Emily's dress, a confection of lace and silk she'd said was her dream. I had poured thousands of dollars into creating their perfect day, and my reward was a hurried thank you and a seat at a table in the back, far from the bridal party. At the time, I'd told myself it was just an oversight, that they were young and caught up in the excitement. Now, in the harsh light of my son's command to stop calling, that memory felt like another calculated slight. They didn't want a mother, they wanted a sponsor, and the sponsor was expected to be silent. A wave of impotence washed over me. I had built my entire world around them, sacrificing my own dreams of travel, my hobbies, even my friendships. I'd canceled lunches with friends because David had a crisis. I'd put off repairing my own leaking roof because they needed a new water heater. My life had been systematically dismantled to provide the building materials for theirs. And now, I was left in the ruins, with nothing but a dial tone and the crushing weight of my own foolishness. The flowers on the wallpaper seemed to mock me with their painted cheerfulness. I sat there for what felt like hours, motionless in the cold kitchen, as the foundations of my world crumbled into dust. The shock was a physical blow, leaving me breathless and lost in a fog of grief for a relationship I was just beginning to understand had never really existed. The sun had set, casting long, distorted shadows across the kitchen floor, before the numbness finally began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning fire in the pit of my stomach. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years: anger. Not the fleeting irritation of a burnt dinner or a misplaced set of keys, but a deep, foundational rage that thawed the ice in my veins. My son's words, intended to wound and silence me, had inadvertently struck flint to steel. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't thinking about David's feelings or Emily's anxieties. I was thinking about me. I pushed myself up from the chair, my joints stiff from sitting for so long, and walked with a newfound purpose to the small office where Tom had kept all our records. The room was a time capsule, meticulously organized, a testament to a man who believed in order and accountability. It was time for my own accounting. I pulled out the heavy file drawers and began my grim excavation. I wasn't just looking for recent bank statements. I was conducting an archaeological dig of my own generosity. I found the carbon copy of the check for their house down payment, $80,000. The date was 4 years ago. My hand trembled slightly as I placed it on the desk. Next came the student loan payments I'd made for Emily so she could start their marriage debt-free. Another $25,000. The car down payment, $10,000. The loan for their furniture, which I had paid off entirely, $7,500. Then I moved to the bank statements, spanning the last 5 years since Tom's death. I started a list on a yellow legal pad, my handwriting sharp and angular. Each line item was a small death, a tiny monument to my own naivety. There were the monthly transfers, initially labeled help with rent, which then became a steady, expected $1,500 wire transfer for their mortgage assistance, for 3 years straight. That alone was $54,000. I circled the number twice. I kept going, my anger fueling a meticulous, almost obsessive focus. I tallied the countless Zelle payments for groceries, gas money, utility bill, usually a few $100s at a time, but they added up like grains of sand forming a desert. I found the withdrawal slips for the cash I'd given them for emergencies: a broken-down car, a surprise dental bill, a last-minute flight for a friend's wedding. These emergencies happened with alarming regularity. My legal pad filled up. The numbers swam before my eyes, a dizzying testament to my folly. I had financed their vacations, their clothes, their dinners out. I had paid for Emily's yoga classes and David's golf club membership. I had enabled a lifestyle for them that I, with my modest pension and Tom's carefully invested life insurance, would never dream of living for myself. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. The house was utterly silent. I stared at the final number at the bottom of the page. I had to add it up 3 times because my mind refused to accept it. Including the large, one-time gifts and the relentless stream of smaller payments, I had given David and Emily over $190,000. $190,000. The figure didn't just represent money. It represented the trips to see my sister in Oregon that I never took. It was the new car I desperately needed but kept putting off. It was the leaky roof over my head. It was the security Tom had worked his entire life to provide for me, squandered on two capable adults who treated me not as a mother, but as a renewable resource. That number was the price of my blindness. The emotional pain that had paralyzed me just hours before had now crystallized into something hard and clear: resolve. For the first time, I wasn't choosing between my own well-being and my son's. I was simply choosing myself. There was no hysteria in the decision, no dramatic outburst. It was a quiet, firm click, like a lock falling into place. I picked up the phone, my hand perfectly steady, and dialed the 24-hour customer service number on the back of my bank card. The voice on the other end was cheerful and professional. I explained my situation with a calmness that surprised me. "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I began. "First, I need to cancel all automatic transfers. I have one scheduled for the first of the month to a David Richter. Please cancel it permanently." "Of course, ma'am. I can do that for you." "Next," I continued, taking a deep breath, "my son is listed as an authorized user on my primary checking account and has a card linked to it. I need him removed immediately and his card deactivated. As of right now." There was a slight pause. "I can certainly process that, ma'am. For security purposes, can I ask the reason for the sudden removal?" I looked at the staggering number on the legal pad. "The reason," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning, "is that access was granted under circumstances that no longer apply." I went through every financial tie that bound me to them. I removed Emily as the emergency contact on my savings account. I put a verbal password on all my accounts that only I would know. I requested a stop payment on a check I had written them last week for property taxes. Each word I spoke was a brick being laid in a new wall, a fortress to protect what was left of my life and my finances. When I finally hung up the phone, a profound sense of lightness washed over me. It was terrifying, this new freedom. For years, my purpose had been defined by their needs. But as I sat there in Tom's silent office, surrounded by the evidence of my past mistakes, I felt not loss, but a quiet, powerful sense of reclaiming my own life. The bond wasn't just broken, it was cauterized. There was no going back. I had chosen myself. The silence lasted for exactly 4 days. It was a strange, unsettling peace, like the quiet in the air before a thunderstorm. I spent those days in a daze of anxious productivity, cleaning out closets, sorting through Tom's old clothes for donation, anything to keep my hands and mind occupied. I didn't check my phone, didn't jump when the house creaked. I was waiting. I knew the storm would break the moment they realized the well had run dry. It happened on a Friday afternoon, the first of the month. I was in the garden pulling weeds with a vengeance when I heard a car door slam with unnecessary force. I looked up to see David's massive SUV parked haphazardly at the curb, one wheel on my lawn. A moment later, both he and Emily were marching up my walkway, their faces grim. Emily was clutching her phone like a weapon. I didn't have time to get to the door before David was using his key. The sound of the lock turning sent a jolt of violation through me. They strode into my house without knocking, finding me in the kitchen as I was taking off my muddy gardening gloves. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" David demanded, his voice a low growl. He wasn't yelling, not yet, but the fury was simmering just beneath the surface. Emily was a step behind him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her usual sweet expression was gone, replaced by a mask of pinched indignation. "The mortgage payment bounced, Sarah," she said, her voice sharp. "The automatic transfer you've made every month for 3 years didn't go through." I took a slow breath, bracing myself. "I canceled it," I said, my tone even. David stared at me as if I had just confessed to a crime. You what? Why? You didn't even tell us. I also tried to use the card at the grocery store. Emily chimed in, her voice rising. It was declined. Declined. Do you know how humiliating that was? They told me the card had been deactivated. That's correct, I said, meeting her glare. I had it deactivated. For a moment, they were both speechless, caught off guard by my calm admission. They had clearly expected me to be flustered, to offer excuses, to apologize. They had come here for a confrontation, but they had walked into a verdict. What is wrong with you? David finally exploded, taking a step closer. Did something happen? Are you sick? Did one of your busybody friends put some stupid idea in your head? The accusations were a smokescreen for the real panic in his eyes. It wasn't concern for my health. It was terror for his finances. I am perfectly fine, David, I replied, standing my ground. I've simply decided to make some changes to how I manage my own money. Your money? Emily let out a short, incredulous laugh. We built our entire budget around your help. You promised you would help us with the house. We bought this house because you said you'd support us. The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost insulting. I gave you $80,000 for a down payment, Emily. I believe my support has been more than generous. That was a gift, she shot back. You can't just give a gift and then hold it over our heads forever. I'm not holding it over your head, I said calmly. I am simply stating a fact. I have supported you. Now that support is ending. David started pacing my small kitchen, his large frame making the room feel claustrophobic. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was about to have a tantrum. This is insane. It has to be because I yelled at you on the phone. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I was stressed. I shouldn't have said that. But you can't just cut us off completely. It's cruel. It was a textbook performance. The apology not for the sentiment but for the consequences, immediately followed by the accusation of cruelty. He was trying to reframe my self-preservation as an attack on them. This isn't about that phone call, David. That was just the final straw, I said, the words tasting of ash. This is about years of me giving and you taking, without any thought for my own security or well-being. The atmosphere in the room grew colder, thicker with unspoken resentments. The pretense of concern was evaporating, revealing the raw, ugly truth of our relationship. Emily's voice dropped, taking on a saccharine, pleading tone that set my teeth on edge. Sarah, please. Be reasonable. We'll be on the street. The bank is going to start foreclosure proceedings if we miss another payment. We have nowhere to go. Is that what you want for your only son? For your grandchildren one day? The threat was veiled, but clear. You owe us. Your future as a grandmother depends on your compliance now. It was a low blow, and it nearly worked. A flicker of the old guilt, the old sense of maternal obligation stirred within me. But then I looked at their faces. I saw the entitlement in my son's eyes and the cold calculation in my daughter-in-law's. They weren't family members in distress. They were business partners whose primary investor was pulling out. They weren't afraid of losing a mother. They were afraid of losing their income stream. Your housing situation is your responsibility to solve, I said, my voice hardening. You are two healthy, intelligent adults. It's time you learned to live within your means. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew the invasion had just begun. This was no longer a disagreement. It was a declaration of war. And they were already inside my fortress. My quiet declaration that they were responsible for their own lives was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The thin veneer of civility shattered completely. Live within our means? Emily's voice dripped with scorn. We are living the life you encouraged. You were the one who said we should buy the bigger house in the good school district. You were the one who pushed David to take the job with the lower salary but better title because it had prestige. It was a masterful distortion of the truth. I had encouraged them to be prudent, But they had heard only what they wanted to hear, twisting my words into a mandate for their fiscal irresponsibility. "That is not what I said, and you know it," I replied, my voice dangerously low. "I told you to live in a place you could afford." David stopped pacing and planted himself in front of me, using his height to loom over me. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one I'd never seen him use with me before. "You're not yourself, Mom." "This isn't you. You've been acting strangely for weeks. First, the silent treatment after our phone call. Now this. This financial ambush. You're being vindictive and irrational." The word irrational hung in the air. It was a test, a probe to see if I would react with emotion, with hysteria. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I simply stood there, my gaze unwavering. Seeing that intimidation wasn't working, Emily switched tactics again. She began to wander around my living room, picking up photographs, running her fingers over the furniture. "You have all this," she said, her voice a soft, poisonous whisper. "This big house, all paid for. Tom's pension. Your savings. It's more than enough for one person. We're your family. It's supposed to be for us, eventually. What's the point of hoarding it all now?" The raw greed in her statement was breathtaking. In her mind, I was already a ghost, a caretaker of their future inheritance. My life was merely a waiting period. Then, the invasion became literal. David walked over to the desk in the corner of the living room where I kept my mail and began to shuffle through the pile of letters. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice sharp with outrage. "Those are my private papers." "I'm looking for a reason for this insanity," he shot back, not even looking at me. "Maybe you've gotten tangled up in some kind of scam. Or maybe you're having memory problems. People your age sometimes get confused about finances." It was a calculated, vicious escalation. They weren't just arguing with me, they were building a case against my competence. The shock of it almost made my knees buckle. My own son was implying I was senile, all because I had turned off the money tap. I moved to stop him, but Emily stepped in my way. "We're just worried about you, Sarah," she said, her expression a perfect mask of feigned concern. "If you can't manage your own affairs, maybe you need someone to help you." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a naked declaration of their intent. As David continued to rummage through my desk, a small folded piece of paper fell from a stack of envelopes he was holding. It fluttered to the floor near his feet. He didn't notice it. My eyes darted to it. It was a piece of high-quality stationery, the kind used by financial institutions. While Emily kept me occupied with her false sympathy, my mind was racing. I had to get them out. Now. "Enough," I said, my voice ringing with an authority I didn't know I possessed. "Both of you, get out of my house." They both froze, turning to look at me. My tone had shifted. The defensive calm was gone, replaced by cold, hard command. "Excuse me?" David said with a sneer. "This is my childhood home. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, pointing a trembling but determined finger toward the door. "You came in here without my permission. You have insulted me, and you are going through my private property. You have 5 seconds to leave before I call the police." The word police finally registered. It was a line they hadn't expected me to draw. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. David's face flushed with a dark, mottled anger. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he might refuse, might even become physical. He took a menacing step toward me. "You wouldn't dare," he growled. "Try me," I said, my hand already reaching for the phone on the kitchen wall. We stood in a standoff, the air crackling with tension. The silence stretched, a taut wire of familial hatred. Finally, with a curse under his breath, David turned and stormed toward the door, yanking it open. Emily followed, but not before giving me one last look of pure venom. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You're going to die old and alone." The moment the door slammed shut behind them, I rushed to the living room. the piece of paper was still on the floor. My hands shook as I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a draft of a loan application. A mortgage pre-approval application for a much larger, more expensive house in a gated community an hour away. But that wasn't the shocking part. In the section for applicants' income, they had listed David's salary, Emily's part-time wages, and then, under other regular income, a line item for $2,500 per month, labeled Family Support, Guaranteed. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just been living off my generosity. They had been leveraging it, banking on it as a permanent, guaranteed asset to secure their own financial future. The document in my hand was proof. This wasn't about survival, it was about ambition. My money was the fuel for their social climbing, and my refusal to provide it had just derailed their entire plan. I sank onto the sofa, the paper trembling in my hand. The invasion was over for now, but I knew the war was just beginning. They hadn't just threatened me. They had shown me their strategy. If I wouldn't give them my money willingly, they would try to take it by proving I was no longer fit to control it. And they had already begun to lay the groundwork. The slamming of the door was not an end, but a beginning. The silence they left behind was heavy, charged with the residue of their threats and the chilling revelation of the loan application. For an hour, I sat motionless on my sofa, the incriminating piece of paper clutched in my hand. The initial shock of their audacity was hardening into a cold, pragmatic fear. They weren't just angry, they were strategic. The words irrational, confused, need someone to help you echoed in my mind. They weren't just insults. They were the seeds of a legal assault. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. My maternal instincts had failed me. My emotional appeals were useless. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a legal battle for my autonomy, and I was dangerously out of my depth. The next morning, I woke with a singular purpose. I spent an hour online, my search terms blunt and desperate. Elder financial abuse attorney, protecting assets from family, forced guardianship. The stories I read were terrifyingly similar to my own, tales of parents bled dry by entitled children who, when the money ran out, tried to seize control by claiming incompetence. But the articles also offered a glimmer of hope. They spoke of legal recourse, of protective orders, of lawyers who specialized in defending the rights of people like me. I found a name that appeared frequently, recommended on several legal aid sites and senior forums: Arthur Jensen. His firm specialized in elder law, and his biography described him as a staunch defender of senior independence. I dialed his office number, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. When I met with Mr. Jensen that afternoon, his office was the opposite of what I expected. It wasn't a cold corporate space, but a warm, book-lined room that smelled of old paper and freshly brewed coffee. He was a man in his late 60s, with a kind, weathered face and eyes that were both gentle and incredibly sharp. He listened to my entire story without interruption, his gaze never leaving mine. I told him everything: the years of financial support, the SUV, the house, the constant emergencies, my son's final cruel words on the phone, the invasion of my home, and finally, the loan application. I slid the folded piece of paper across his polished mahogany desk. He read it slowly, his expression growing more grim with each line. When he finished, he looked up at me, and for the first time, I felt a surge of validation. He wasn't looking at me like I was a hysterical old woman. He was looking at me like I was a victim of a calculated crime. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm and reassuring, "what you are describing is a classic and unfortunately very common case of elder financial exploitation. Their actions, the pressure, the sense of entitlement, and now the escalation to questioning your mental competence when you cut them off. It's all straight out of the abuser's playbook." Hearing a legal professional confirm my fears was both terrifying and profoundly relieving. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being abused. "The loan application is our smoking gun," he continued, tapping the paper. This demonstrates premeditation. They didn't just hope for your support, they presented it to a financial institution as a guaranteed income. This is fraud. He leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from sympathetic listener to strategic planner. They have declared war, Sarah. Our first job is to fortify your position. We need to act, and we need to act now. The plan he laid out was clear and methodical, a world away from the emotional chaos I had been living in. First, he said, we change the locks on your house. Today, you will give no one a key. Your home must be your sanctuary, and they have proven they will violate it. Second, we install a security system including cameras at all entry points. Every time they come to your property from now on, it will be documented. Their harassment will become our evidence. Third, he went on, we will draft a formal cease and desist letter. It will state that they are to have no further contact with you. No phone calls, no emails, no visits. All communication must go through my office. If they violate it, we will file for a restraining order. Finally, he said, his eyes meeting mine with a serious intensity. You need to gather every piece of financial documentation you can find. Every bank statement, every canceled check, every receipt that proves the money you gave them. We will create a timeline, a ledger of their dependency. We will show that your decision to stop funding them was not irrational, but the most rational decision you could have made. I left Arthur Jensen's office feeling as though a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a suit of armor. I was no longer just a wounded mother. I was a client, a plaintiff, a woman with a plan. I drove straight from his office to a locksmith. As the man drilled out my old locks, the locks David had a key to, I felt a pang of grief for the trust that had been irrevocably destroyed. But it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of profound security. Later that day, a security company came and installed small, discreet cameras over my front and back doors. The technician showed me how to view the feed on my phone. The feeling of being able to see who was outside my home before they could even ring the bell was empowering. That evening, as I sat in my newly secured house, I began the painstaking process of assembling my financial history. I organized the documents into a thick binder, each page a testament to my years of misplaced generosity. It was a painful task, but with each document I filed, I felt my resolve harden. This binder was not just a record of my foolishness, it was now my book of evidence. It was the story of why I had to fight back. I was no longer just defending my money. I was defending my mind, my freedom, and my right to live the remainder of my life in peace. The first actions had been taken. My fortress was being built. The cease and desist letter, delivered by certified mail, landed with the impact of a grenade. The immediate result was a deafening silence. For 2 weeks, there were no calls, no texts, no surprise visits. My new security cameras showed their SUV driving slowly past my house a few times, a predatory circling, but they never stopped, never got out. It was a tense, fragile peace. I knew it was not a surrender, but a regrouping. They were planning their next move, and Arthur's letter had forced them to be more cunning. The attack, when it came, was not from David, the son whose anger was a blunt instrument, but from Emily, the daughter-in-law whose manipulations were a stiletto. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning. The caller ID was blocked. My first instinct was to ignore it, as Arthur had advised, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice cautious. "Sarah." "It's Emily. Please don't hang up." Her voice was completely different from the venomous tone she had used when she left my house. It was trembling, fragile, and thick with unshed tears. It was the voice she used to use when she needed something, the one that had always worked on me before. I remained silent, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. Arthur's voice was in my head. "Do not engage. Hang up and call me." "I know we're not supposed to call," she rushed on, sensing my hesitation. "I know your lawyer sent that awful letter, but I had to talk to you. David doesn't know I'm calling. This is just me. I can't live like this, Sarah. Our family is falling apart. She paused, and I could hear a soft sob on the other end of the line. It was a masterful performance. Every instinct I had honed as a mother screamed at me to comfort her, to say, "It's okay, we can fix this." But the woman who had sat in Arthur Jensen's office, the woman who had itemized $190,000 in squandered love, held her ground. "What do you want, Emily?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the sympathy she was mining for. "I want to fix this," she whispered. "David is a mess. He's proud and stubborn, you know how he is. He says terrible things when he's hurt. But he loves you. I love you. You're the only mother I've ever really had. What happened? It was a misunderstanding. We were scared. The things we said, we didn't mean them." This was the temptation. The sweet poison of a false apology, designed to lull me into lowering my defenses. She was offering me the one thing I had always craved, the illusion of a happy, loving family. "We want to make it right," she continued, her voice gaining a hopeful lilt. "Let's have dinner. Just the three of us. Here, at our house. I'll cook your favorite, chicken piccata. We can talk, really talk, without lawyers. We can go back to how things were. Go back to how things were." The phrase hung in the air, revealing the true purpose of her call. Going back meant restoring her allowance. It meant reactivating the credit card. It meant resuming the monthly mortgage payments. I looked down at the thick binder of financial records sitting on my desk. It was my shield, my anchor to reality. I thought of the loan application, of the words, "family support, guaranteed." "Emily," I said, my voice cold and mature, stripped of all emotion. "Are you still planning on buying the house in the gated community?" The silence on the other end of the line was instantaneous and profound. The feigned sobbing stopped. I had just thrown a flashbang into her carefully constructed theater of remorse. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice losing its fragile edge. "I think you do," I pressed on calmly. "The one you were applying for a loan for. The one where you listed my guaranteed family support as part of your income." Another beat of stunned silence. When she spoke again, the mask was gone. The sweetness had curdled into pure acid. "You went through our things," she accused, her voice low and furious. "No, Emily. Your husband went through my things, in my house, and he was careless enough to drop it. A happy accident, I suppose. You have no right—" "I have every right to know when I am being used as collateral," I interrupted, my voice like ice. "Let me be very clear so there are no more misunderstandings. There will be no dinner. We will not go back to how things were. The financial support has ended. Permanently. Any further attempts to contact me will be reported to my lawyer and will be considered a violation of the cease and desist order. Is that clear enough for you?" I could hear her breathing, sharp and ragged with fury. She had played her best card, the emotional appeal, and I had not only rejected it, but had countered with a devastating truth. She had lost control of the narrative, and she knew it. "You are a bitter, selfish old woman," she finally spat, the words dripping with hate. "I hope you enjoy your money. It'll be a cold comfort when you're all alone." "I've been alone for years, Emily," I replied softly, the truth of it settling in my bones. "The only difference is, now I'm no longer paying for the privilege. Goodbye." I hung up the phone before she could respond. My hand was shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. I had faced the siren's song of manipulation and had not wavered. I had passed their test. I had rejected their poisoned olive branch with a coldness and maturity I didn't know I possessed. The grief I felt was real, a deep mourning for the family I wished I had. But for the first time, that grief was not stronger than my will to survive. After the call with Emily, a strange sort of calm settled over me. The lines had been drawn, the enemy's tactics revealed. The hope for reconciliation, a flickering ember I hadn't even realized I was still guarding, was finally extinguished. Its death brought a surprising clarity. There was no more waiting for an apology. No more agonizing over what I could have done differently. There was only the path forward. But the path felt profoundly lonely. My life had been so entwined with theirs that in cutting them off, I had severed my primary social connection. The silence in the house, once a peaceful respite, began to feel heavy again. My fortress, built for protection, was starting to feel like a prison. Arthur had warned me this would happen. Abusers isolate their victims, he'd said. Your next battle, Sarah, is to rebuild your world. I started small. I forced myself to call an old friend, Carol, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. I had drifted away from her and others because my weekends were always on standby for whatever crisis David and Emily were having. I was ashamed to admit this, so I simply said I'd been going through a difficult time. "I'm so glad you called," Carol said, her voice warm and without judgment. "I've missed you. Let's get lunch this week." My treat. That lunch was a revelation. We talked for 3 hours about books, politics, our gardens, our health, everything and nothing. Not once did the conversation turn to money. Not once did I feel like I was being evaluated for what I could provide. It was a conversation between equals, a simple, beautiful exchange of thoughts and time. It felt like drinking cool water after years in a desert. Emboldened, I reached out to others. I rejoined the book club I'd dropped out of. I started taking a pottery class at the local community center, something I'd wanted to do for a decade. With each new connection, I felt a piece of my old self, the person I was before I became a 24/7 support system, slowly re-emerging. My most significant new connection, however, was right next door. Margaret was a widow in her 70s who had lived in the house next to mine for 20 years. We'd always been waving neighbors, exchanging pleasantries over the fence, but never truly connecting. One afternoon, she saw me struggling with a heavy bag of mulch and came over to help. "Rough day?" she asked with a knowing smile, easily lifting the bag. She was a spry, energetic woman with a grip like a lumberjack. "You have no idea," I sighed, and on a whim, I invited her in for iced tea. As we sat on my porch, the whole story came pouring out of me. I told her everything, expecting shock or pity. Instead, she just nodded, her expression one of deep, empathetic understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My daughter. It was my daughter about 10 years ago. It wasn't a house, it was a business venture. One after another. I was her angel investor," she said. "Turns out, I was just her angel." The kinship was immediate and overwhelming. We spent the rest of the afternoon trading stories, our experiences a near-perfect mirror of each other's. We talked about the guilt, the way love gets tangled up with financial obligation. We talked about the slick, practiced apologies that always preceded a new request for cash. We talked about the moment we finally said no and the explosive, accusatory fallout that followed. "They have a script," Margaret said, shaking her head. "They all read from the same script. First, they make you feel responsible for their happiness. Then, they make you feel guilty for wanting your own. And when you finally cut them off, they try to make you feel crazy." Finding her felt like finding a fellow survivor after a shipwreck. She introduced me to 2 other women in the neighborhood who had graduated from the same school of hard knocks, as she put it. We formed an informal support group, our own little garden club of financial independence. We met for coffee, helped each other with household chores, and provided a safe space to vent, to cry, and to celebrate our hard-won freedom. This social support was a lifeline, a chorus of voices reminding me that I was not alone, not selfish, and certainly not crazy. This newfound strength prompted me to undertake a different kind of cleansing. For years, my house had felt less like my own home and more like a waiting room for David and Emily's next visit. I decided to reclaim it. But first, I needed to visit the one place that was truly sacred to me and Tom. I drove 2 hours out to the coast, to a small, windswept bluff overlooking the ocean, where we had scattered his ashes. The air was crisp and clean with the smell of salt and pine. I sat on our bench for hours, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. I talked to him, not as a grieving widow, but as a partner consulting her other half. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to tell me, Tom," I said to the wind. "I thought by giving David everything I was being a good mother. But I was just getting in the way of him becoming a good man." I cried. But they weren't the tears of a victim. They were tears of release. I was letting go of the guilt, of the false responsibility, of the ghost of the son I thought I had. I was forgiving myself for my blindness. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the water, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, deeper than any I had felt since Tom died. I drove home feeling lighter, stronger. The world was no longer a hostile place I needed to hide from. It was a place of possibility, filled with new friends and old hobbies waiting to be rediscovered. My fortress was no longer a prison. It had become a base of operations for my new life. I knew David and Emily weren't finished with me yet. I knew there would be another attack. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The next assault was more insidious than a surprise visit or a manipulative phone call. It was an official-looking letter from the County Department of Adult Protective Services. My hands trembled as I read it. A formal complaint had been filed by a concerned family member, alleging that I was exhibiting signs of self-neglect and impaired judgment, and that I might be a danger to myself. The letter informed me that a caseworker would be visiting my home in 2 days to conduct a wellness assessment. My blood ran cold. This was their new attack. They had failed to intimidate me, failed to manipulate me, so now they were attempting to use the power of the state against me. They were trying to build an official record of my supposed incompetence, a paper trail that could be used in court. I immediately called Arthur Jensen. "They're trying to create a pretext," he said, his voice grim after I read him the letter. "They file a complaint, you refuse the visit, and they use your refusal as proof that you're paranoid and uncooperative. It's a classic tactic. But we're not going to let them win." His instructions were precise. "You will welcome the caseworker into your home," he said. "You will be calm, polite, and completely transparent. And I will be there with you." The morning of the visit, I was a bundle of nerves. I cleaned my already immaculate house, baked a batch of cookies I didn't want, and changed my outfit 3 times. I was falling into the trap of feeling like I had to prove my sanity. When Arthur arrived 20 minutes before the appointment, he took one look at me and said, "Sarah, breathe. You have nothing to prove. The truth is on our side. Just be yourself." The caseworker, a young, earnest-looking woman named Miss Evans, arrived exactly on time. She seemed surprised to see Arthur sitting in my living room. He introduced himself as my legal counsel, present to ensure the process was fair and respectful. Ms. Evans's professional demeanor tightened slightly. She began with a series of gentle but probing questions, reading from a checklist on her clipboard. "Mrs. Richter, we've received a report that you've made some abrupt and significant changes to your financial habits recently. Can you tell me about that?" This was my resistance. Not an angry denial, but a calm, documented rebuttal. Guided by Arthur, I didn't just answer her questions. I presented her with the evidence. "Yes, I have," I said, my voice steady. After a period of careful review, I decided to end the substantial financial support I had been providing to my adult son and his wife for the past 5 years. I gestured to the thick binder on the coffee table. "My attorney has a full accounting of that support, totaling over $190,000 if you'd care to see it." Arthur slid the binder across the table. Ms. Evans's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages of bank statements and canceled checks. "The report also mentions you've cut off communication with your family," she continued, looking up from the binder. "That's not entirely accurate," Arthur interjected smoothly. "My client was forced to cease direct communication after her son and daughter-in-law entered her home without permission, verbally harassed her, and attempted to go through her private documents. We have a copy of the cease and desist letter we sent them, which they have since violated. We also have security camera footage of them repeatedly driving by her house." The communication hasn't been cut off. It is now being managed through my office to prevent further harassment." He handed her a folder containing a copy of the letter and a log of dates and times from my security camera footage. Ms. Evans looked from the folder to me, her expression shifting from professional skepticism to genuine interest. She moved on. "We were told you've installed an extensive security system, which the complainant felt was a sign of paranoia." "I installed a security system after my home was invaded by the very people who filed this complaint," I stated simply. "I think it's a sign of prudence, not paranoia. Wouldn't you agree?" She had no answer to that. She asked about my health, my medications, my social life. I told her about my new friends in the neighborhood, my book club, my pottery class. I gave her the names and numbers of Carol and Margaret, telling her they would be happy to speak with her about my current state of mind. When she asked about my diet and the upkeep of my home, I simply gestured around the spotless living room and pointed to the plate of fresh-baked cookies on the table. "Would you like one?" I asked. The interview lasted for over an hour. With every question designed to paint me as a confused, paranoid old woman, Arthur and I presented a calm, rational, and well-documented counter-narrative. We weren't just defending against their attack. We were systematically dismantling their credibility. We were using their own weapon, the bureaucracy of social services, to build my case and expose their malicious intent. By the end of the visit, Ms. Evans's demeanor had changed completely. The professional distance was gone, replaced by a look of weary sympathy. After she left, a wave of triumphant exhaustion washed over me. I had met their attack head-on, not with fear or anger, but with facts and composure. My resistance had been my quiet, unshakable competence. I had refused to be the victim they tried to paint me as. "She will recommend the case be closed," Arthur said, packing his briefcase. "And her report now becomes part of our evidence. They thought they were building a case against you. Instead, they've just helped us build a stronger one against them." The victory was sweet, but I knew the war wasn't over. This was just another battle. By reporting them for harassment and proving their complaint was fraudulent, I hadn't just defended myself. I had launched my own counteroffensive. I had shown them that I would not be intimidated, and that for every dirty trick they played, I would be waiting with a clean, hard-hitting truth. The final battle came not in my living room, but in the sterile, imposing environment of a courtroom. 3 months after the visit from Adult Protective Services, I was formally served with a lawsuit. David and Emily, represented by a slick, expensive-looking lawyer, were petitioning the court for emergency guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and that my erratic behavior posed a threat to my own financial and physical well-being. Their star witness, according to the filing, was a psychiatrist who had, based on their anecdotal reports, prepared an opinion that my sudden changes in behavior were highly indicative of late-onset paranoia and diminished executive function. The day of the hearing, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and anger had burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding steel. I wore a simple navy blue suit, a string of pearls Tom had given me, and I looked my son and daughter-in-law directly in the eye as we waited in the courthouse hallway. Emily glared back with undisguised hatred. David couldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at the floor, a grown man being led into battle by his wife's ambition and his own weakness. Their lawyer, Mr. Davies, was smooth and condescending. In his opening statement, he painted a picture of a beloved family matriarch who had suddenly and tragically lost her way, a vulnerable senior being manipulated by new influences, my friends, and opportunistic legal counsel, Arthur, for their own gain. He portrayed David and Emily as heartbroken children, forced to take this drastic legal step for their mother's own good. Then came their testimony. Emily took the stand first, weeping as she recounted a fabricated story of my confusion, my memory lapses, my bizarre accusations. It was a convincing performance, but Arthur dismantled it piece by piece on cross-examination. "Mrs. Richter," he asked, his voice gentle but firm, "in the 2 years prior to this sudden decline, Can you produce a single email or text message where you expressed concern for your mother-in-law's mental state that wasn't immediately followed by a request for money? She could not. David's testimony was even more painful to watch. He repeated the lies about my irrationality, his voice stumbling, his eyes fixed on his lawyer. When Arthur cross-examined him, he asked a simple question. Mr. Richter, in your entire life, has your mother ever given you reason to believe she is anything but a sharp, intelligent, and capable woman? No, but recently, David began. Recently, Arthur interrupted, she stopped giving you money. Is that correct? The truth of it hung in the silent courtroom, stark and ugly. Then it was our turn. Arthur called Ms. Evans from Adult Protective Services to the stand. Her report, which detailed her findings of my competence and the misleading nature of the complaint filed against me, was entered into evidence. He called Margaret and Carol, who testified to my clarity, my engagement, and the relief I had shown in freeing myself from a toxic financial situation. Finally, I took the stand. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the judge, a woman in her 60s with intelligent, discerning eyes, and I told my story. I talked about the love for my son, the desire to help, and the slow, dawning horror of realizing I was being used. And then Arthur had me read the total from my ledger. In the 5 years since my husband's death, I said, my voice clear and strong, I have given my son and his wife $192,450. The moment I stopped, they tried to have me declared insane. Those are the facts, Your Honor. I leave you to draw your own conclusions. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. She not only denied the guardianship petition, but did so with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. She openly rebuked David and Emily and their counsel for a frivolous and malicious lawsuit that represents a gross abuse of the legal system. She looked directly at my son. Your mother deserves your gratitude and respect, she said, her voice sharp with disdain. Instead, you have repaid her love and generosity with this shameful attempt at financial theft. Case dismissed. The defeat was absolute. As we left the courtroom, I saw them huddled with their lawyer, their faces a mixture of shock and rage. Their attempt to seize my assets had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly, leaving them with a mountain of legal bills. That was the last time I ever saw them. In the months that followed, I sold the house. It held too many memories, and I was ready for a new beginning. With the proceeds, I bought a beautiful, light-filled condo in a vibrant senior community. I donated a significant sum to a legal aid organization that, like Arthur's, specialized in protecting elders from financial abuse. News of David and Emily trickled back to me through the grapevine. Without my funding, their house of cards collapsed. They defaulted on the SUV, and it was repossessed. Their home went into foreclosure. I heard Emily had to take a second job as a waitress. David, stripped of the lifestyle he felt he was owed, grew resentful. Their marriage, built on a foundation of my money, crumbled under the weight of their own responsibilities. My new life, by contrast, blossomed. I traveled. I went to Italy and learned to cook pasta, to France and painted lavender fields. I fell in with a group of vibrant, funny, and independent women in my new community. We played bridge, took yoga classes, and went on cruises. I found a new kind of love, not the fraught, obligatory love of a parent, but the easy, chosen love of friends. I was happy, truly and deeply happy, in a way I hadn't been in years. Sometimes, late at night, I would think of David. I would feel a pang of sadness for the boy he once was, and for the man he never learned to be. But the grief was clean, without guilt. Their downfall was not my victory. It was the natural consequence of their own choices. My victory was not their ruin. It was my peace. I had won back my life, my dignity, and my future. And in the quiet joy of my new beginning, I knew I had finally, truly, come home to myself.